to definitely have your audio off. If you ask a question, we might ask you to unmute to ask it. One other thing to be aware of, because it's a real benefit of being part of IOSH, is the Benevolent Fund. So if you are in times of hardship, the IOSH Benevolent Fund is there to help you continue with your membership and continue to access all the services that IOSH has to offer. But on the other side of it, if you're shopping at Amazon, you can set your Amazon account up to give charitable donations to IOSH off every purchase that you make. That's called Amazon Smile. So I'd strongly encourage you to go away and have a look at Amazon Smile if you've not already got it set up for this or at another charity. It's also perfectly possible, and the information's on the screen, but also available online. If you want to make a donation to IOSH, to that Benevolent Fund, that is an option that's there as well. Okay, so that's a really brief introduction to today's session. What I want to do is to get right into the webinar. So I'm going to introduce you to Graham Setter. He's the chairman of the Setters Group, which has existed for nearly 30 years. The focus of Setters is people engagement on safety culture and coaching, so performance coaching in health, safety and wellbeing. Graham himself has been involved in high-risk sectors, and I know before he moved into the consultancy, the most recent one of those was that he was an installation manager on an offshore platform. We put all that aside, so I know Graham because I've worked with him probably 3 or 4 years ago for about 18 months when I delivered a behaviour and culture programme into United Utilities. And hopefully what you'll see and what you'll experience today is Graham's personality, his engaging and unique way of talking about safety, health and wellbeing, culture and performance. And I know that I learned a lot over the period I worked with him. And I've said this to him before, so it probably won't embarrass him, but there are people I know at United Utilities whose thought processes and mindset changed, and it changed their way of thinking so much that they came out of their shell and I suppose progressed a lot more in life than they'd ever thought they were able to before working with Graham. So I've got a huge amount of time for Graham. I'm excited to hear about the session today, about what we didn't know about safety culture. I think at that point I'll stop talking, Graham, because I could whitter on for hours. So Graham, over to you.
Thank you, Andrew. That was a lovely kind of invitation. Thank you. Okay, let's get straight on with it. I'm going to kind of pose some what I consider to be healthy questions. And these are posed to all of us, including me, by the way. So they may seem a little bit controversial, and they're designed to be so. So let's start off with probably the most controversial one. Are we managing the statistic or are we managing the risk? Now, I'd love to be with you and get some kind of feedback on that and what your gut reaction would be. But I'm talking really about the perception of people who are on the receiving end of this, if you like. Do they feel that they're being managed by the statistic or managing the risk? And I guess as safety practitioners, I don't know all of your backgrounds, obviously, but a large proportion of you will be safety practitioners. Do you feel sometimes you're managed by the statistic as opposed to your understanding of the risk? So I'll leave that one hanging there, and it is all about perception. Or will I? I'll probably share with you that the talk on the street out there is that we are managing by these statistics. That the people that really need to kind of find out what safety performance is all about, look at the statistic. So if that wasn't controversial enough, the next one is what level of real engagement do we have with the people at risk? Because what I want to kind of share with you as we go through the session is that there's a step change in how we need to be thinking about safety. And I guess that's almost kind of questioning you whether you think there is a step change. And it's down to how we actually need to engage with people so they are as safe as they can be when no one is watching. Just consider that phrase, as safe as they can be when no one is watching. You know, we spent decades making people safety conscious, but how safety subconscious are they? What is their level of subconscious competence? What kind of choices do we all make when no one is watching? And of course, that challenges all sorts of things. It challenges how we've been very successful in safety over decades, making people very safety conscious. And we should congratulate ourselves on that. But are we confident that people are safety subconscious? Do they know what that means? And then last but not least, how can leaders, managers and supervisors influence a step change, if you accept there is one, a step change in thinking concerning health, safety and well-being? Okay. Let's start off in very common ground. I'm sure we've seen this hundreds and hundreds of times, but hopefully I can show you another perspective on it. The kind of the old favorite Bradley curve. It's something that's very close to me really, because Vernon Bradley, he did a lot of these studies around steelworks, and I started my career in the steelworks. And I think it's worth remembering that this curve is based on fatalities. And, you know, we're talking about, is it 844, I think it was? Yeah, 850 fatalities back in the kind of 60s and 70s. And I distinctly remember conversations with colleagues, with leadership team, that this is totally unacceptable that we've got these number of fatalities. Because in the steel industry alone, we'd have something like 20, 30, 40 fatalities a year. And we were having conversations like, that is totally unacceptable. So we said, it's totally unacceptable. How can we reduce that figure? I mean, you think that was surreal, wasn't it? To be talking about reducing the figure. We were almost volunteering someone to die at work. But just, I think it's worth reflecting on how much we've come from there. Now, I know when the road gets really tough, it's worth thinking back that we've come on massively to now be talking about things like zero harm. Okay, we'll all have a different version of that, but we're talking about zero harm. But I guess you'll all recognize that sort of curve, that over the decades, and we're talking about, can't quite see that there. I think this is approximately 144, it's just off screen for me. I think it's down to 111 now or something like that, but we don't know whether that's the COVID effect. So we've done incredibly well to bring that curve right the way down, but we are kind of experiencing this paralleling with the zero line. And the stages we've gone through, reactive, well, obviously 60s and 70s, we reacted very much to legislation, where legislation made it quite clear that people were accountable, and people who were in senior positions in companies were accountable. People knew that anyway, but when you started to kind of attach consequences like imprisonment and things like that, and huge fines, it really kind of focused our attention. And there was some significant difference then, and improvement. Then we went into the systematic stage. We can't just keep reacting to stuff. So let's put some proper procedures in there, which are relevant to the work that we're doing and the risk profile. Then we went to independence, where we started to train people extensively. We're probably into the 90s now. And then last but not least, and we're still here, is this interdependence, where we're encouraging people at all levels to talk about safety in a coaching and mentoring way, so that you can actually kind of encourage people to have a second thought about what they're doing in terms of the extent that they're putting themselves at risk. Now, that sounds easy, doesn't it? But it's not easy. If you've got someone who's been working together for 10 years, they've got a kind of significant relationship, it's difficult for one of them to wake up one morning and say, I'm going to have a different conversation. It almost kind of puts at risk the relationship that you have with that person. And what would that conversation sound like? You know, how would you raise the topic where you've both been doing a particular activity in a certain way, and you've probably kind of never experienced anything nasty as a consequence from that? So it sounds easy, interdependence, but we're all kind of challenged by it, I guess. And this is where, in this last line, I guess, between independence and interdependence, that's just kind of indicating that we're paralleling with the bottom line. I call this gap here the choice gap. And I would further qualify that. It's not a conscious choice we're talking about here, it's a subconscious choice. And it would be interesting if we were all together, that if we could have versions on what people think that means, subconscious choice. But no one gets up in the morning and says, I'm going to have an accident today. And yet the choices that they've made over the years, which have resulted in them doing the job in a certain way, puts them at risk. But of course, most of their experience is that they've never had a bad consequence. So that reinforces that they must be doing it right. And it's kind of getting them to almost unravel what appears on the surface to be working for them. And if it was subconscious choice, then how can we actually review those choices? What would be an appropriate mechanism for us to review the choices? And what's the incentive for that? Well, the incentive to me, and I guess this is reinforcement, is it 96% of workplace accidents are down to unsafe behavior. And that's the outcome from these subconscious choices. Well, a combination of conscious and subconscious. But unless we get it right, the consequences are dire, because we get this. And I don't know whether you kind of incorporate this into your version of the Bradley curve, but I've experienced that everything seems to be okay. We're doing really well in terms of safety. Our stats are telling us we're doing okay. And then bang, we have one single event, which often, unfortunately, results in the worst possible outcome. And over the years, a lot of the times we've been engaged by an organization is when they've been in this situation and they've had a fatality, quite frankly, being blunt. And I'm of the opinion that that choice that people are making, which results in that fatality, is not a conscious choice. It is absolutely a subconscious choice. And that's why it comes as such a surprise to the organization, because everything we've done before that, we've been monitoring conscious choices, people being safety conscious. But have we been monitoring how their understanding of subconscious choice is? And I think the answer must be no. Not adequately, anyway, that's for sure. And it's interesting, that word choice. It's took me a long time to do this, but I looked up the dictionary definition of it. And I got 2 out of 3, which isn't a very good score considering I've been doing this for most of my working lifetime. And the dictionary definition of choice says that choice is an option. And choice is the offer of alternatives, alternative ways of doing things. Now, I would have got those 2, but I don't think I'd have got the 3rd one, that choice is possibility and creating possibilities. But it really kind of fits with me, because when you get an understanding of subconscious choice is where people excel at anything. It's the balance between their conscious choice, their skills that they develop, and their subconscious choice. So without subconscious choice, you can't really excel. But when you actually get that right and understand subconscious choice, it's very generic. You can apply it to anything you want to get better at. And it's no coincidence that lots of the organizations we work with have got better at all sorts of other things. You can't start to get the choices right in terms of safety and then say, I'll go back to the old way of doing things when I deal with everything else. So lots of our clients now are beginning to realize that they can use this as a mainstay for performance in their business, and certainly for people engagement, because there's a lot of what's in it for me here for individuals. You know, we've always used consequence as a what's in it for me, make sure you don't fall foul of the consequence. But people see the severity of an accident. They just don't see themselves being the victim. You know, accidents always happen to other people. They don't happen to us. And it's a good job that we have some of that mindset, otherwise we wouldn't step into some of the workplaces that we offer people. But obviously that can be a slippery path where people stop analysing how it affects them personally. Okay. I'd love to say okay so far and get some comments back, because I'm sure there would be some interesting comments coming back. And this is a really important one, and I nearly forgot it. We have to link every gain that we make by educating people and getting them to understand subconscious choice. We have to then feed that back into the system. I guess it's been an ambition of all of us to get the people who are at risk to contribute to developing the systems. And I guess most of us have had mixed results with that. But if you've really got people engaged at this very high quality level, you'll get them feeding back things like, okay, that system is well-meaning. It was put in after we had an accident. It was obvious we were going to tighten things up, but do you know what? We do not do the job that way. And if we can create an open environment where we get people sharing how they actually do the job, there's an opportunity for us to retrospectively risk assess why people have made these choices over the years. And it's something I know Andy and I used to talk about this. We call it integration. It's where people are really so integrated that they're going to feed back in a very open way what they actually do, not what we think they do. And what's more, not what they show us they do when we're observing them. Because if you think about it, as soon as someone becomes observed, they show us what they think we want to see, and they go straight back into making conscious choices. So we get no glimpse of what the actual subconscious choices are. It's only someone who shares that environment as a peer that gets an understanding of what those subconscious choices are. Okay, let's have a look at what's practicalities of subconscious choice. Here's one for starter, and I talked about it. Personal risk perception of 0. It's never going to happen to me. I can see it happening to other people, but not to me. I'm in control. I know what I'm doing. By the way, I've done this job for 25 years. What are you lot on about? What do you know about it? You know, you've heard all of these comments, and actually, if you listen to them, there's some substance in them. You know, it is perception, but it's reality to that person. And if you ask yourself a simple question like, who would you rather be in a car, the driver or the passenger? I'm guessing 90% of us would say the driver. Unless we intend to partake in some alcohol that night, and then we might go, okay, I'll be the passenger. But most of us would say the driver. And yet, what evidence do we have that we're a better driver than the other person? It's all perception. It's no real evidence. And if someone was really truthful to us, they might say that we're not a very good driver, but we create this perception of 0. You know, while I'm in control, nothing's going to happen. So if people have got that kind of level of perception out there, what about when they come across an opportunity where they can take a shortcut? So that shortcut might be not wearing the PPE. I'm only just doing this job. I really don't want to wear it. I might choose a different tool because it's handy for the job and I haven't got the right tools anyway. Could be a ladder or something like that. I don't need to do all the checks. I know it'll be okay. In fact, I don't even need to do the full isolation. You know, it's a small intervention. Yeah, I don't need to go through that full procedure. You know, these sort of things that people convince themselves they don't need to do. And they're all tied up with, we have a subconscious realization that we have a certain time on this planet. You know, we're not here forever. So we're hardwired to save that time as much as we can. There's a lot of incentive for us to do so. So we are natural time-saving devices. So it's easy to go down that route if we think we can save some time. And you know, again, you have to ask yourself the question, how many times have you overtaken a vehicle just because you've got frustrated at being behind them? But it's not really with the intent of, I'm going to get to my destination quicker. And lo and behold, you end up at the traffic lights with them anyway. but it's that drive to save time. It's a natural drive, and we have to recognize that. We call it the 168 drive. There's only 168 hours in a week. That's not going to change. So, okay, let's say we take the shortcut. What's the next stage? I guess most of you will know this. You know, if you link that one activity to repeating it over a period of time, and don't hold me to 21 days, that's just about an average. If you do something for 21 days, then it's going to be your habit. And it will override other habits that you have as well. Not all the time, I am generalizing. But normally, at that kind of duration, you've now created a new habit. Or as they call it in psychology or applied psychology, for me, the words are too long for psychology, that you've created an automatic subconscious routine after about 21 days from taking a shortcut in the first instance, which we didn't risk assess, by the way. We just relied on the outcome being the right outcome and said, that's fine, I'll do it again that way. And we don't go back to doing it the long way, do we, once we've taken the shortcut? But now we're getting into the territory of no more judgment. And in fact, Andrew knows what I'm talking about, and some of the others will know when I talk about alpha trans state. This is the mind and body being in two different places. You really don't have to think about it now. You know, the habits that you're relying on when your mind and body is in two different places. Again, a practical example, it's how the car magically appears in the drive and you find yourself in the driving seat, but you can't remember half the journey. You know, you have been driving that car with a high level of subconscious competence, not conscious competence. So now we don't even have to think about where the action or activity came from. It didn't come from a shortcut. It doesn't matter where it came from. In alpha, the awareness of risk fades even more. And then getting away with it, of course, reinforces the belief that it was the right thing to do anyway. So now we have trapped something which was a time versus risk choice, and we've developed it into a subconscious routine. And it will stay there, a bit like the sword of Damocles, until something adverse happens. We won't change it for any other reason. Unless we have someone comes along and says, let's have a look at that again. What was the kind of process you went through? Did you do any risk assessment when you took the shortcut? Because they may have come up with an idea which the rest of us haven't thought about. Hallelujah. You know, it's great to save time, but let's do some risk assessment on it. Otherwise, it is an accident waiting to happen, quite possibly. Okay. So you could call that a vicious circle, but I prefer to call that a downward spiral, really. It is an accident waiting to happen, and that links with, guess what? The severity spike on the Bradley curve. That's where they come from. You know, when you have a serious accident, and you know, most of you have been in this situation, and you start to kind of investigate, you think, oh my gosh, why didn't we see that? It was so obvious. And invariably, the accident has not been the first time that someone has behaved in that same way. There's probably been lots of evidence of people behaving in that way, but they've never had a conversation about it. No one has had the confidence or the competence to have a conversation about it. So it's just been waiting there to happen. So I guess what we're talking about, if we were going to sum all this up, it's mindset. So if you've got another 3 hours, I'll talk about mindset. Okay, perhaps not. So if I could just pick on one part of mindset, which I feel is, you know, you're talking about conditioning, beliefs, values, feelings and emotions emanating in a behavior. But the one for me, which is key, and it goes back to I did look this one up, a dictionary definition, that attitude is your response to a situation, your chosen response. So I like the link with choice here. Although it's interesting when you talk with people about attitude, they feel that it's something that was conditioned into them and they had no choice. Which of course, when you think about it, that's not the case. It will influence you, what you've been conditioned into, but you've always got the choice. If there's one thing in life that no one, and I mean no one, can take away from you, it's your attitudinal choice. Because even if the worst thing happens to you in the world, you can choose how to eventually think about it. So you've always got choice, which is very personal to you. So when we do research with a company, we like to kind of just check in with what the attitude levels are. It's a reflection of mindset. And we end up with a kind of a feedback model, if you like, really, more than a statistical model. And if you've got someone that's got high levels of attitude and high levels of energy, we tend to use a sporting nomenclature. They could be classed as playing for the organization. They certainly have the potential to do so. It's the kind of person that says, I've got a great idea. The only trouble is they have lots of great ideas. They don't always finish them, but at least they have a great idea. And they've got the high energy to see that through. But unless they've got other people working with them, there won't be an outcome probably. And that's where other people of similar attitude, but not quite the same energy levels, who we call supporters, they will support the people who have the great idea. Usually with some level of reluctance, oh my God, not another idea, but yes, okay, it sounds good. Let's get together and work on this. And then we actually draw a line under those two levels of attitude, if you like. And I'm going to have to ask this rhetorically, but have a think about how many people percentage-wise would you think would fall into the playing and supporting category? You might want to kind of throw something up on the chat line. Just have a think. Is it 20%, 30%, 40, 50, 60? So if I tell you we've done hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these, and we've only ever had one occasion when it's been less than 68%. Now, for anybody that had less than 68%, there's some really good news for you, because what potential are we missing out on? If it feels like it's a lot less than that, and I totally understand why it would feel, because I'm going to kind of show you what's below the line here, which is like a huge drag factor. But if we've got like 68% people plus who are above the line, what potential are we sitting on? And what potential can we realize when we start to open this up and get people to understand what subconscious competence is all about, the power of that subconscious competence? Because of course, what drags us down, the rest of us, is what's below the line. And in this corner here, where it's low on attitude and low on energy, we've got people who are sleepwalking. That's being polite. They don't cause any harm. They just don't feel that they're respected within the organization, recognized, whatever it is, and it might just be perception, but it's reality to them. And they feel, do you know what, just pay me at the end of the week, I won't cause you any trouble, but they're like sleepwalking through. They're not going to break any records for sure. Now you can live with that. They're not bad people. In fact, these are behaviors. They're not necessarily a representation of the person. These are behaviors, a demonstration of behavior. But if you've got people with high levels of energy over this side here and low levels of attitude, they can fall into the category of sniping. And I'm sure you could give me a whole list of the type of things that a person who is sniping would say. Oh my God, here we go again. What are they doing now? This management team haven't got a clue. It's an initiative, it will go away. Just don't take any notice about it. You've heard it all before. I guess at this stage, you're actually putting labels on people's foreheads and recognizing people in your organization that speak like this. And they're almost the same category as a naughty child. You know, the more attention they get, the louder they get. And that's because actually they're suffering, if you were kind of translating this into self-esteem, they're suffering from low self-esteem, and they see this as a platform to be recognized. These are huge generalities. Please don't pick me up on the psychology, but you know what I mean in practical terms. This is how it feels. Again, you could just about live with that, but when these people are around with very high energy levels and very negative, they are underminers. So you get the player saying, I've got a great idea. Somebody help me, please. The supporters going, yeah, I'll help you with that. The sleepwalker going, no, forget me, count me out, not interested. The sniper saying, that will never happen. The underminer says, I will make absolutely sure it never happens. So they're almost damaged goods. For whatever reason, They have got anti the organization because they feel the organization's been anti to them. So they'll go out of their way to undermine. The good news is, if you're really unfortunate, you'll have 5% of people in there. So, but they can be a massive influence. And that would probably be why most people may have got under 68% in the top two categories. And it is down to self-esteem, and the self-esteem that they've kind of developed over their period of time of being in work. So you've got playing, obviously high self-esteem, supporting high self-esteem, sleepwalking and sniping, low self-esteem, undermining pathological high self-esteem. They're always right, and you will always be wrong. So I guess this gives us some clues, or does it, as to where we should focus. Again, reflect, where do you think our focus is demanded on that graph? Do we spend more time with the large percentage of people kind of recognizing how good they are? Do we spend time modeling how excellent they are at doing things so we can share that way of doing things with others? Or do we go chasing after the sleepwalkers, the snipers, and particularly the challenging underminers? And I think if we're all honest, I certainly will put my hand up. I've spent most of my time in the bottom right-hand corner. I think I've got time for one quick story. Andrew would be pleased it's only one, but I'm not proud of this, but when I was an offshore installation manager, there was one guy on the platform I was running. No, they were running it. I was the offshore installation manager. It annoyed me because he was smarter than me, but he was an absolute disruptor. He was a great technician. He was a mechanical engineer. He was really good at his job. Oh my God, did he cause trouble? Now, if you think working on an oil platform, some of you may have done so, it's very cultural. You know, you don't just work there, you live there. You know, so you can imagine the disruption this guy caused. And it got to the stage where I couldn't handle him. He was much too smart for me. And he had a lot of peer influence that used to kind of support him as well. So I had something at my disposal. Please take this in the context it was meant. I could put on his boarding card, NRB, not required back. Now, I would never, ever do that to anybody, except I phoned 3 people on other platforms and said, this guy is really good. He comes with a health warning. I can't cope with him. He's a real disruptor, but if you're short of a mechanical fitter, he's your man. And I had one person said, I'll take him. No problem at all, I'll take him. So I knew he wasn't going to lose his job. So there's me sitting smugly in my cabin the night before the helicopter was leaving with NRB on his card. And I had a deputation from 3 people, and I can remember them coming along the corridor to my cabin, and they almost slammed the door open and said, we'll call him Joe. We believe Joe is leaving. Will you change your mind? I won't tell you what came left after that, but there was lots of things I couldn't repeat anyway. And I just said, right, he's yours. I can't cope with him. Don't come and complain about him. Yeah, okay, I'll revert on that. And within 3 months, that guy left the platform. I had absolutely nothing to do with it. And I don't know why, although I suspect very strongly that the real kind of influence there was not me. And I had power as an offshore installation manager. The real influence was peer influence. And I hope that's a story which kind of tells us that, you know, peer influence is what this is all about. Because if we're talking about subconscious competence, it's only a peer that sees that subconscious activity. So it's reinforcing. We've got to get people at the same level. It's that horizontal communication. We always say we can force this down from the top. We can influence it and support it. We cannot force it. You cannot create a culture by decree. So you've got to tap into that peer influence and get it working for you. Okay. And these are the words that you use, and these are the actions you would actually partake in to create that peer influence and to build the confidence. You know, it's all the R's quite conveniently. It's respect, recognition, reassurance, reward. The last one might surprise you, responsibility, but think about it. You know, when you're giving people responsibility, you're probably kind of reinforcing the previous 4. you are respecting them, you are giving them recognition, you are giving them reassurance that they can take on extra responsibility, and they'll probably get paid more for it as well. So responsibility is in there, giving people responsibility. Checking on the time. Right, people engagement model. So whenever we talk about leadership here, I think we always fall into the default of, right, leaders need to get out there more and really share what their values and beliefs are. I'm privileged to coach one-to-one with lots of the leaders of the organizations we work with. And every leader wants to get out there more. What's the likelihood of them getting out there more? Pretty low. It's a practicality. And what's the impact of them being out there? It's not consistent. It can actually support and boost, but we cannot rely on that. We've got to get each level of an organization treating each other as a peer group. So we've got to get the leaders treating each other as a peer group and coaching and mentoring each other. The managers treating each other as a peer group, the supervision treating each other as a peer group, and the core teams. We've got to start looking at peer influence being the main medium of change for the better. And this model is to kind of demonstrate that. Where's the opportunities of doing this? So if you start off by looking at the interaction, I call them contact points. It's like contact points in sport. So the solid line there is the contact points that we have already. And rather than look for new ones, we're always looking for kind of new sexy ones, but why don't we look at the ones we've got and improve them? So when a supervisor is setting someone to work, setting an individual or a team to work, and taking into account that supervision now may not even see the team, you know, the supervisor might be the planner who's planning for the work to be done, and they don't actually see the team. But let's assume it's conventional supervision. So they'll be doing something like going through the RAMs, they'll be going through integration and what have you. How are we going to do this job? You know, what's the job? How are we going to do it? Why would we do it that way? And if we can get that engagement to talk about subconscious routines more, you know, actually tapping into, okay, this is the way we're supposed to do the job. How do we actually do it? Can we be open with each other here? Almost have an armistice, if you like. Please tell me how we actually, everybody got some ideas of how it can be done even better. Now, what kind of shortcuts have we taken in the past? What are we tempted to take? Do we feel there's pressure on us in terms of time pressure? All this sort of, it kind of just moves the conversation into a more meaningful zone, a more open zone. And of course, what you get out of that then in the dotted line, you've got a chance of giving recognition to the team. You've got a chance of helping individuals to grow by kind of boosting their self-esteem. So that's a really important engagement level. And I know it's one we all focus on. It's just out of interest. One of the organizations we work with, we're doing a lot of work in South Africa and working in Malawi. They don't call them toolbox talks. They call them a toolbox ask. That is so subtle to my mind. So they're not doing the usual toolbox talk. Oh God, here we go again, another toolbox talk. We're not doing this activity today, guys, but you know, I have to go through it. We have to tick the box. Anyway, you know all this stuff. Anyway, please sign here. Now, okay, that's a bit of an exaggeration, or is it? But a toolbox task really kind of gets you thinking about what's involved in a toolbox task. Are you going to get to find out what really goes on? I would say yes. So let's look at the next level. If I was to ask the question on the solid line there, how many managers you know feel that they are totally accountable for the safety management system? I would say very few. They think it's effectively delegated to the supervisor. And yet there's a clue in the name, it's a safety management system. So if we could have the managers talking with the supervisors about the effectiveness of the safety management system and how is it working, are there areas that we should kind of review? What kind of feedback are we getting from the teams? What do they feel about this particular procedure? I think we'd have a much more meaningful conversation and a much more supportive conversation for the supervisor, as opposed to what could be perceived as being a bit of a slopey shoulder you have to do that, you're the supervisor. And of course, it should embrace people then who are not necessarily line managers. It should pick up on technical managers, because anybody can ask those questions if they feel that they are accountable for the safety management system. And that should give, on the dotted line there, an indication to the supervisor that the manager is there to support them. And it should give the manager an opportunity of sharing what they think the culture should be to get all of this right. And last but not least, leaders and managers. So if we look at the solid line there, performance reviews, what does the dashboard look like when a leader has a conversation with the manager, a performance review? Is it all statistical? No accidents? Whippy, fine. Or are they talking about risk profiling? You know, what kind of risks are we do we have out there? What are the changing risks? What kind of reaction are we getting from the people who are at risk? What kind of feedback are we getting from them? It'd be great to think that the performance review saw health, safety, and well-being in that context and gave it an equal platform to everything else that is conventionally in a performance review. And of course, that gives a leader an opportunity to coach and mentor the manager as well, and develop the managers and get feedback from them. One more model. And if I haven't really challenged you so far, I'm going to challenge you now. So if it was like target shooting, we have to be able to almost aim above the target to get there. So let's talk about beyond zero. We'll all have different versions of what zero harm is anyway, which is fine. It's not a problem with that. But what is beyond zero like? I've struggled with the Bradley curve for years because I like a curve. I'm old fashioned. I like a curve to go up and if I'm improving. So if we put the Bradley curve, something like that, and that's the zero line, what would the curve look like above that line when we've gone beyond zero? What would we have done? What would our thinking have been to achieve that? And I'm of the opinion that the curve would be something like that. If all of the things I've been talking about, and not restricted to those, were in the forefront of our agenda, where we had leaders who were supporting the organization and not thinking they had to do it all themselves. The bonus is when they get out there and they can share their beliefs and values. We've got each level of an organization coaching and mentoring each other in a peer-to-peer way, that we recognize that subconscious competence is the key to this. And from that, we get performance in everything we want to do. Then I think we can create something I call cultural headroom. So that the risk may not go away, the risk may still be there, but it won't reach a stage where it really impacts upon us. We would have headed it off at the pass by a conversation that would have taken place, by someone saying, I really don't know what you're doing there, but it just doesn't look quite right to me. Can we just talk about that? Can you explain to me what you're doing? By someone who is not involved in the activity and is perhaps looking at something a contractor is doing and saying, look, okay, this might seem like fussy, but look, you know, we don't want anybody to get harmed on this side. Can you just talk me through what your methodology is here? Or are you aware that there's an activity going on just to the left of you, which could impact upon your safety? Anything like that. If we could open the organization up, I think we can create cultural headroom sufficient to head off that spike. Easy to say, isn't it? It's not so easy to do. And what would our style of engagement be? It's not all coaching and mentoring for sure, because when you're right down the bottom of the Bradley curve, it's about instructing people, policing them, if you like. It's about making sure that they're competent in terms of conscious competence, their training. It's advising. So we don't jettison any of those, we'll still use them. But we need to get more into the arena of mentoring and coaching. And coaching is a technique, there's no doubt about it. It can feel very patronizing if you get it wrong. You know, so there is some kind of education there on how people can gain rapport and kind of demonstrate their genuineness. It doesn't matter if they're clumsy as long as they demonstrate they're genuine. And if you've got two people who are getting the same kind of engagement, if you like, they'll be forgiving of someone who's trying to coach them to get the best benefit. Then looking at culture maturity, yeah, okay, pathological, hopefully we moved away from there, but reactive, we'll still always be reactive. We'll always look at what we've done and think there's a better way. And we should always look at our systems and see if they're the best and they're fit for purpose. But we get more into the proactive. You know, what can we visualize as the risks out there? And how can we actually kind of create a picture of how we best achieve the outcomes that we all strive for? And not the least generative, it actually almost gives you a definition of generative, and part of that definition has to be that you've got an interdependent culture. I can't see how you can have a generative culture unless you've cracked interdependency, where people feel competent and confident to actually have a conversation with each other. So I'll leave you with some thoughts if I haven't already done so. The ways of thinking cannot be changed unless the concrete signs given by the chain of command evolve. Lots of words, but you know what that means. So it has to start at the top, but the top can't do it. It has to be all of the levels, the managers, the supervisors, the core teams, even your supply chain have to be on board with this. And you get the culture you deserve as a leader, manager, or supervisor. At the end of the day, it's a choice. That's it. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Graham. Just while Michelle starts to have a look through the questions, I thought I'd just give a bit of context to how we use some of that in at United Utilities, just so that it's not just you putting the content across. I think one of the ways we found it really useful, especially when we were talking to people who'd been involved in incidents, is we started to anchor things in those currencies. So starting to talk to people about, it's actually, do you know what, it's okay that you may not have been concentrated, you may have been in that alpha state, because it's part of the way your brain works, but we need to understand that and unpack it. And those four currencies which you touched on, so the alpha state, the time versus risk, so people taking the easy way or the shorter way, which we know happens in every industry. Personal risk perception, so that I still use the driving example when I'm talking to people about that. I am a safer driver than my wife, but she's a safer driver than me when she's driving. And it is your personal take on the risk. And it's the same when people are climbing up ladders. I hate it. I won't go past the second step unless it's properly fixed or something. Whereas my dad will be up it like a whippet. And the same with habits. And I think starting to be able to talk to colleagues in an engaging way. So you could use the just culture process. You could use lots of other ways of talking to people about human error, but at least starting in a really engaging way that isn't confrontational, and talking about it in terms of those currencies really helped us get started there. I think a couple of the other things you touched on, I have to call out as well that I asked Graham to do something really unfairly. So I asked him to pack in what normally takes days and weeks of integration into an organization into a 45-minute session. But I was writing things down as he talked about them, and I think he ticked off everything that I was hoping he'd talk about that two-way engagement process around reinforcing behaviors as well, and how you encourage that in an organization. For me, one of the really powerful things, again, that I still use is that systems plus people motto. So it's really important that you have good systems, but actually if the people aren't engaged in them and they can't use them, and if the people don't have the right culture and the right behaviors, they're not going to work. So having those two things together, for me, still really rings true. Yeah, and then the other thing for me, that coaching rainbow, I'm really pleased you got that in at the end, because I think that's super important for us as professionals, not just in organizations. Where do we sit as individuals when we're out on site as a health and safety professional, when we're talking to people? Have we gone in that policeman style saying, you can't do that? And have we stayed in that? Or are we actually talking to people about how things happen, why they've happened, and what could be done better in future? So yeah, I'll stop talking now, because that'll give Michelle some time to look through the questions if she hadn't already. But thank you, Graham.
Pleasure.
Okay, thank you, Andy, and thank you, Graham. It was really good. I was identifying myself in some of those traits in your thing. I'm not going to say which ones, but it does make you think, doesn't it? It does make you really examine where you fit in the boxes. And I could see myself in a bit of them all, if I'm honest, probably in the bottom area. And I think, yeah, it does just make you as a practitioner have a little think, doesn't it, when you look at, the charts as they were then. So there's a couple of, not really questions, just people commenting. So I'm not going to give you loads, Graham, but there's Simon Rosser, if you're there, if you want to come in. You were asking about the cohorts of people, if you split out what type of people fits into the different, the sleepwalking slide and stuff.
Yeah.
Are you there, Simon? Do you want to unmute yourself?
Simon's picture there, he's just on mute, yeah.
Just unmute yourself, Simon. You can ask away to Graham, please.
Hi there. Hi, Graham. Interesting how you sort of split it up into attitudes and so on. Have you actually split that up further into looking at whether they're youngsters into the business for the first time or old hands who have been there, done that? And the reason I ask, I did a safety culture survey on a business sector, and the worst performing ones were the guys who were predominantly late 50s, early 60s, serving their time to retirement in senior-ish positions, not quite at the top, who were the blockers. And another organisation, they were known as the permafrost, because great ideas from above, great ideas from below, but nothing got through the middle.
You're so right. You're so right. Yeah, we call it a cultural atmosphere. So we recognise it, but I think most people do recognise it in themselves as well. So it's not something that we've had to point out to people. And even accident statistics actually back that up as well. That there's a vulnerability of those people who've been around a long time because they've developed lots of habits, but they've not risk assessed them. And they influence others as well. Because they're looked up at, aren't they? You've been here a long time. It's very difficult for a young person to come along and say, can we look at that a different way? So yeah, we take all of these into account. As Sandy said, I tried to get a river through a tap today, because there's so much more that we do, but it does all boil down to attitude. If you use a word like attitude, everyone can join in, and they don't compartmentalize themselves then. I think it was really important what Michelle said as well, and I should have said it. I defy any of us not to have appeared in one of those sections on that attitude thing. But it can be something that's said to us that can kind of put us into another section. But it's where do we spend most of the time? Are we most of the time wanting to be a player and a supporter? So we'll all share time in all of those areas. That's life, isn't it? That's the variety of life.
I think, Graham.
Go on, Michelle.
I think on that, I think most of us are, but there will be a point where you try and get your point across and you try and get your advice across, but as you say, that you hit a ceiling of those blockers, and then you realise you're just not going to get anywhere, no matter what you say, what you do, whether it's legal or not, and then you'll find yourself going into the sleepwalking bit, won't you, and think, well, if they're not listening, I'll just peg back a bit, and that's the dangerous bit for me. You should never stop being the challenger, but
you're absolutely right.
It is difficult.
That's the time to tap into peer influence. You've all done it. We've all done it. If you've got a group and there's one person that's kind of causing a lot of aggro, you open it up to the rest of the group. So you're actually tapping into peer influence. You won't always get the instant response, but it might kind of quieten down the person that's giving you the trouble, because deep down they know what you're doing. So you look around to get rapport with the rest of the group, open it up to the group as a whole. What do the rest of you think? Perhaps not as open as that, just come at it from a different angle. Peer influence is the key for me.
Yeah, definitely. I've got another question come through, Mustafa. Do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question? I think you have to unmute yourself, Mustafa. You want to ask your question? Graham, I'll just read it in case you...
Yes, fine.
Okay, just wonder if there's a relation between Allah concept and the choice gap. That's what Mustafa's asked.
Possible. Yeah, I think there is. Yeah, because the choice indicates that it's not a pure science. You know, so as low as reasonably practical, yes, we'd all like to eliminate the risk. But how often can we do that? You know, so we tend to be using the that nomenclature to get the best outcome, aren't we? You know, we can't always get rid of the risk. You know, some of the places we wouldn't even consider working if we were trying to get rid of all the risk. So I think there is a relationship, a direct relationship. That's too simple an answer, isn't it?
Yeah. No. Andy, did you want to come in?
I was just before I do, because I was going to say one more thing then and start to wrap it up. Is there any more questions that people want to ask right now? You can stick your hand up if you've not put it in the chat. I can't see anyone.
If people want an offline conversation with me, I'm very happy, you know that. You know, if they want to contact me personally, there's no problem.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing that I wanted to call out, Graham, is that you've got another session with, is it East Midlands?
Yes. Yes.
So I've just checked, it's not on the IOSH website now, so it is sort of hot off the press, but can you remember the date that it is?
22nd.
22nd of July.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, so if there's another session from Graham with the East Midlands branch, so just let them know we're promoting their events as well as our own. But do you want to tell everybody what that's about as well, Graham?
It's very similar, really. I'm pretty consistent. It is all about choice, just coming at it from a slightly different angle. But it will be about choice at the end of the day.
Brilliant. Okay. So what we're going to do now is we're going to finish the webinar. So there aren't any more questions that I can see on the chat. And if anyone's got any more questions, if they want to talk to any of the branch members, please hang on. We'll be around at the end. We're happy to pretty much talk about anything. But other than that, look forward to seeing you at our next session in a couple of weeks, which is on learning teams and a new approach to accident investigations. Registration details are in the same place as always. But yeah, thanks for your time today, everyone. And thank you again, Graham.
Pleasure.